In this video, I will show you how to put together a lease option agreement. And to do this, you'll need three forms to structure it. You'll need an option agreement, car form OA. You'll need a purchase agreement, RPA. And you'll need a residential lease or month-to-month rental agreement, car form RLMM. Now we start with the option agreement. And I just did a tutorial on the option agreement and how a wholesaler or a buyer that wants to assign their interest in a contract can get paid for it with an option. But this is different. What we're doing here is we're talking about a property owner, a landlord, that's going to go into a lease agreement with a tenant, but they want to give that tenant the option to purchase the property that they're renting. So we'll jump right into it. We'll put the date of this form up here. We'll put where this contract is taking place. Of course, it's a general proximity. I put San Diego. Keep it general. Don't get too hung up on this. Now, for option, or who's creating the option? Well, the owner of the property, aka the landlord, is creating the option. So I wrote property owner. Of course, you wouldn't write that. You'd write the property owner's name or their entity name. And then who's getting the option? The tenant. So you'll write the tenant's name here. Now, of course, this should match what you put over here on your rental agreement. Okay. Now, this is where we incorporate one of those other forms. We check this box for the purchase agreement. This is the purchase agreement that we create over here. So in the top left corner of page 1 of the purchase agreement is a date. So you write the date of the purchase agreement here, whenever that purchase agreement was drafted. And that's just so you can identify the proper purchase agreement. So it's another way to identify, yes, it's the purchase agreement with the one with this date in the top left corner of page 1. Now, the purchase agreement, of course, that should be terms that the property owner and the buyer or tenant, which is the same in this case, would find agreeable. Because usually a lease option, when a lease is done, when a lease is drafted, both parties have an idea of what a fair or mutually beneficial purchase terms would look like. And that's what will go on the RPA. I'm not going to do the whole RPA tutorial because we've already done it, but I will show you what we're going to add here on page 4 of 16. Now, this page is where there are all these check boxes for other forms you want to incorporate into an agreement. We're going to check this box right here, other, and write option agreement OA. Actually, if you could put option agreement OA and even the date of the option agreement, that's even better. That's more precise if you add the date there, the date at the top left corner, because the date's used to help identify the forms. All right, so what are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about a lease that relates to the mutual execution of the attached lease, okay? So you're going to draft that lease. And don't worry, I'll jump back into it shortly here and show you how all this makes sense, but I want to focus on just getting through the option agreement first. So we check the box 1B, lease. Then we check 2, that this is about a lease and not another type of option. All right. Now, shame on me. I should have written the date of the lease. So the date in the top left corner, look, shame on me twice. I didn't put the date here. I just put together sample forms quickly to create this video. So of course you always want to date your forms. Learn from my mistake here. So in the top left corner of the lease, you should have a date. All right. Well, that date is going to go right here because again, we're using dates to identify the forms that are all working in harmony together to facilitate this lease option. So 2, we check lease, we write the date of the lease. All right. And it's offering the tenant the option. Should the tenant desire to purchase this property, well, they can do it. The tenant that's identified in this lease can do it within this period. So we put an option period. And I would say this should be the same period as the lease. That only makes sense that at some point in the lease, if the tenant can, so tenants go into this and it's usually because maybe they didn't qualify for a purchase when they talked to a lender, but maybe they'll qualify in 6 months. Maybe they just need to free up some cash that's in a retirement account. I mean, there are all these different life circumstances that dictate when someone is able to purchase a home. So a lot of times if someone wants to buy it and you're doing a lease option, it's because the tenant is going in saying, hey, I have to rent it now because I can't get my mortgage for whatever reason, but I will get my mortgage in 6 months or 12 months or 24 months or whenever. So the option period should match that lease agreement to give the tenant time to exercise the option should they desire to. Okay, now we're going to take one step back. Consideration for the option. Now, when an option's created, that's a thing of value. Options have value. And so there's inherent value in giving someone the option to do something because you're allowing them the opportunity, the privilege to have exclusive access to something. In this case, this seller or owner or landlord is saying, "Hey, I'll give you first right of refusal in this option, but in exchange you have to pay me for it." Okay, well, most of the time in a lease option, this is blank, or it should be blank, because landlords typically don't charge a flat fee to create an option. Now, in the assignment video I did yesterday, where you have a wholesaler that assigns a contract to an investor and wants to get paid 10 grand in between, sure, they'll put a number here, but we're not. I'll show you what we're going to do in a lease option. Now, keep in mind, we've done very little. I've talked a lot, but we've done very little on this because most of this form is boilerplate text that is pretty easy, pretty simple to fill out. We're just doing what I showed you here. And we're going to, of course, people are going to initial here, but the parties initial. We're going to move on to 8C. This is the next part you have to focus on because this says, hey, should the option get exercised, should the tenant decide to become the buyer and wants to exercise the option, then also if there was money paid for the option up here, then you put all there. But in this case, we technically don't have to have that box checked. I just checked it for the sake of an example. What typically happens in a lease option is that you'll check this box here because a portion of the rent goes toward the down payment or the purchase price. And that's what it says here. It says that basically in a scenario of a purchase agreement, a portion of the rent paid by the optionee, the tenant, shall be applied toward the down payment, okay? Now, let's jump over to the lease agreement. Let me show you how this works. So now, remember how I said that an option creates value and that there is an inherent option in giving someone a contract that says, hey, tenant, you have the first right of refusal. My hands are tied. You get to choose if you want to purchase, and I can't just go sell to someone else willy-nilly while I wait for you. Now, because the property owner, the landlord, is making that concession, they're making that commitment, which is of value, well, the tenant's likely going to pay a little higher amount than market rate. Not necessarily. So if you disagree, fine. I'm just saying that I've seen it this way many times where the rent needs to be generous, right? Maybe market value is $4,000 a month, but we're putting $4,500 here because $500 of this is going to be applied toward the purchase price. So do you see how this is in the form of the down payment? So do you see what's happening here? What's happening here is that in 8C, we are determining what portion of the tenant's rent is applied toward the purchase should the tenant exercise the option. And now if the tenant was just buying this for a flat fee, we go up here and they're buying the option. Maybe a tenant's paying $5,000 for the option to buy someday. That could happen, extremely rare. That's why we're not doing it in the example. Instead, we're saying, no, there's a lease, okay? We check the box here for the lease. We check the box here. We write the date of the lease here. We put the lease period here. And then we go down here, purchase agreement, we check this box. We say how much of that monthly lease payment should be allocated toward the purchase price should the tenant exercise the option. So I just put $500 here. It could be all of it. Now, here's the other side of that coin. If the tenant never exercises the option, they don't get any of that money back. So let's say that in your lease agreement, the tenant's paying $4,500 a month, and they market rent probably was, let's say, just even $4,000. Well, the fact that the landlord/owner is charging a little bit higher means that how they're being compensated should the tenant never decide to exercise the option. They just pocket it. That's what I'm saying. There's no 500. This isn't, no portion of this is refundable. This 500 in the option agreement, that just pocketed and kept by the property owner / optionor should the tenant / optionee never exercise the option. So that's how it works, because again, an option is something of value. So the question is, well, why would any landlord, why would any property owner agree to just give an option to their tenant and then have their hands tied until the option expires? The answer should be something to the effect of, well, they charge a little bit higher monthly rent than normal. Or the tenant paid the landlord $2,500 right up here. But you see now that the value has to work two ways. The tenant's getting value by having the option of first right of refusal. The landlord has their hands tied, so they should be compensated. All right, now, but this is where it's reconciled, that a portion of the payment is going to be applied toward the purchase. And that's it. So a lot of talking for very little editing, but this is all that really needs to be done. I mean, the rest you just fill out here. It's simple. Optionee, optionor, you sign down here as an agent. I mean, pretty straightforward. So this, one last part here on the purchase agreement. So in the purchase agreement itself, remember how we put this OA here? That's all you need to do. That really is all you need to do. But some clients are so neurotic that they want everything spelled out, no matter how redundant it is. Okay, fine. All right. If this agreement does not need to be signed. It can be filled out, but it does not need to be signed for it to exist with an option. But let's say both parties decide to sign it in advance of anyone exercising the option. Okay, so it's January, a lease is created, and this option lasts for a whole year. It's a 1-year lease, and this contract's just sitting in there waiting to see if the tenant decides to exercise the option and proceed with the purchase. Well, like I said, both parties don't need to sign it until the option is exercised. But if they do decide to exercise it, add verbiage or something to this effect. This agreement is subject to the buyer exercising the option in the Form OA dated. See how I did it the right way here? I put the date of the OA. And as such, all timelines begin upon exercising of this option. Because this form basically is frozen. It sits in suspended animation until the tenant exercises the option. So if you have a signed form floating around, that's actually not prudent. You really should have this form, at least if it's signed, restricted by verbiage like this. If this form must be signed by your clients before they're willing to engage in the lease option agreement, then make sure you at least have some verbiage that ties this form down, because if not, you have a signed purchase agreement just floating out there, and that cannot be. This basically acts as a way to keep the signed purchase agreement in its suspended status until the option is exercised. All right, if you have any questions, please leave a comment. I hope this wasn't too confusing. There's a few moving parts here, but at its core, despite my lengthy explanation, this is quite simple. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.